This is a 1998 Ferrari 355, and today I'm going to go over the quirks and features that Doug missed. So if you're wondering what Doug I'm referring to, I'm of course referring to Doug DeMuro, who has a channel where he dresses like an unemployed teenager and reviews cars like this, but he's very specific in what he reviews. He likes to review the quirks and features, as he calls it. And it's an interesting perspective on a car because you can really have an intimacy with a car when you understand the silly things that are put into a car as it's being produced and as it's being designed. So it has a very wide appeal, as you might imagine. Of course, Doug has millions of subscribers, and he was one of the very first sort of pioneers of car YouTube channels. So today I'm going to go over a few things that, having owned the car for a little while, he didn't quite see, or he missed. So the first feature of the car is the size of the rear badge of the car. And this is actually a great feature if you're the type who wants really the whole world to know what kind of car you're in. So if you look at the back, kind of the back of the car, the Cavallino on the back of the F355 is enormous relative to the size of the rest of the car. So if you're behind this car, which if you're not in another Ferrari is where you belong, you will see that there is no doubt what kind of car you're following. Another quirk, the badge on the steering wheel is enormous, just like the badge on the back of the car. And so the next quirk of this car, but is really more of a feature, is what I call, and this is I'm coining this term so you could use it if you'd like, but I call it the pin-in pinstripe. And basically what it is there's a line that goes around the entire equator of the car, and it's very prominent. So this really came from the earlier cars that had a clamshell. So if you think about the box, the BB, this whole piece was a clamshell that opened all the way up, and then likewise in the front. So you had this equator that went around the center. Now this car was designed by Ferrari at Pininfarina. So this particular line is very prominent in many cars of that, many Ferraris of that era, the 308. The F50 in particular, it's very prominent. Also the F40 as well as the Boxer. Not in the Testarossa, however, because of the giant side strakes, which we'll talk about the Testarossa a little bit later. But this, and I'm going to go try and do a close-up here with my camera here, my handy-dandy camera. If you look really closely, you have to basically stand on your head because this car is so low. There's actually a line, a black line painted right in this line here. And the reason for this is not only does it make the car interesting, because you have the breaking up of the top of the car to the bottom of the car, but this line is also where the rear fender meets the bumper, and likewise in the front where the hood and the front fenders meet the front bumper. So this line actually has been around since the original 308s in the box. Actually, it dates back Fioravanti's very first Ferrari design, and that was the Daytona, and it's unmissable on that car. So you find me back in the garage where I have to do a demonstration for my next quirk of this car, and it's perhaps a bit of an obvious one, but I wanted to kind of point out just how low this car was. So I'm 6 foot even, and a car that is considered to be a low sports car-like car would be my V8 Vantage. So if you look at the hood line of this, it probably lines up almost to my belly button. So this car is belly button height for a 6 foot person. If you go to the 355, this car is at my belt height. So this is by far and away the shortest and lowest car that I've ever driven. Even the Jag, which is about, the Jag right over there, just outside of the camera view, is about, say, nipple high. So this is, even for somebody who's not that old and in reasonably good shape, pretty difficult to get in and out of. So the third thing about this car that is certainly a feature, not just a quirk, is the individual throttle bodies. Now, I would show you on this car, but it's actually buried under an entire intake system, so you really can't see it on the car. So I will show some still photos while I'm talking. But the individual throttle bodies are so critical to making the car sound the way that it sounds and also have the throttle response that it has. When I first drove it, was absolutely amazing. Like I could not believe the throttle response, and that's the result of the individual throttle bodies. Cars like this back in the 60s would have carburetors, and each carburetor would have its own downdraft. So you would have, for a V8, let's say, you would have 4 twin downdraft carburetors. So there would be a throttle body for each of the cylinders. That really shortens the intake and it makes things sound and flow faster. To give you an idea, that's actually a rare thing even for Ferraris. So Ferraris that have that are the F50 has it. This car has individual throttle bodies, but for instance, the 308 did not. It had an intake plenum and it had a single throttle body on that. So it's definitely a big thing. Other famous cars, the Lexus LFA and the BMW M1 had individual throttle bodies. In fact, I think all of the M cars in the 80s had throttle bodies. It's an amazing thing. But a lot of people will tell you that the reason why this car sounds the way it sounds is because of the 5 valves per cylinder. Respectfully, I'd say that they're wrong because you can't hear valves. Valves are not something you can hear. You can hear individual throttle bodies and you could hear, obviously, the setup of the exhaust. And this car has, I'm not going to call it one of the quirks, but it definitely has an exhaust that is set up for sounding really good. Now, I happen to have the carpeting removed from the car. I'm actually going to put it back this weekend, but I had it out to do the work that I did to convert this car to a manual transmission. But I left it out so that you guys can see another interesting quirk about this car. And I'm going to give you my theory as to why it is, but after I show it to you. But the first thing is that, like, on the opposite side of things like the hood, or the front boot hood compartment thing, the front hood are actually painted in this sort of matte black finish. Likewise, the shock towers and even parts of the inside of the car. So usually, like, these door jambs are painted in this matte black finish. Now my theory as to why they did that is because this is a tubular space frame car. And so when you have a tubular space frame, you build the entire car, and all of the ancillary things like the doors, all the fenders, certainly the hood, all of these things are put on later. And so my theory is that the chassis is just painted separately. So it's black, and then they paint the body components that eventually bolt onto this thing, and that's why there's a differential. But it's very strange to open up a hood or to open up a door jamb and to see this sort of black, matte black finish. It's just unique. Is actually what I'm calling the Testarossa Lineage. Now, what do I mean by that? Because this car is not descended from the Testarossa, but of course, this car is descended from the 348. And the 348, when it was made as sort of a mini Testarossa. And the big innovation for the Testarossa was moving the radiators from the front of the car, where they would heat up the cabin too much in the case of the BB, to behind and off to the side. So that's why, of course, the Testarossa had such big air intakes on the side, which necessitated the side strakes, which became this massive design thing, so much that it was copied by other manufacturers and certainly a lot of aftermarket companies. So this car, obviously, like I said, is descended from the 348, and the 348 even retained the side strakes. However, I believe, and there are differing opinions as to how this worked out, but the side strakes were actually, on the Testarossa, were actually a misinterpretation of the rules, because they thought that you couldn't have a hole big enough for, let's say, a certain size dog or something to fit in it. But I think it turned out that was not really the case. At any event, it definitely changed the total style of the car, and the way that the architecture of this car and the architecture of the Testarossa, and of course the 348 before this, had moved Ferrari forward on all of their mid-engine cars to this day. So even to this day, all of the radiators are behind the car, behind the driver's seat. And so the next thing that I wanted to show you guys is the manuals. Now there is something that's actually very much a big feature about the manuals that come with the car. Yes, they come in a nice leather-bound thing. That's no big deal. Yes, there's a lot of books, one for the radio, one for the system and so forth, the sound system, one for the security system, I meant to say. But what I find very interesting is the owner's manual itself. And it's specifically the amount of detail that it goes into. Most owner's manuals will tell you how to change the tires, how to tow it properly. This goes into unbelievable detail of each individual system on the car. If you really familiarize yourself with this, this is almost like an abridged version of the workshop manual. In fact, they use the exact same pictures. So they probably just took the workshop manual and abridged it and printed it out, and here you go. So it tells you how to bleed the brakes, for instance. It tells you how to adjust the handbrake. These are all things that I've never seen in an owner's manual. So obviously it goes into a great deal of detail, and of course it's in 4 languages. That's not really a big surprise given the fact that Ferrari is a very small car company and it's about as international as you can get. But the detail is really extraordinary. So there you have it. Those are quirks and features from my 1998 Ferrari 355. And had he had more time in the video, or maybe more time with the car, maybe Doug may have included these quirks as part of his list. So thanks for joining as usual, and please like and subscribe. Obviously a lot more content with this car coming up. I still have some work to do on it. So the Broco Barchetta series of me working on this car is certainly not done by a long shot. I have to do the gauges. I have to replace the sill, which is all beat up. I already have a new one. I have most of all the parts that I need are here. So then I have some work to do on some of my other cars because they've all been very much neglected when I started working on this one here. So I have to really get going on some of those. And in addition to that, who knows what the future brings in terms of what I might test. And stay tuned, and we'll have some more content coming your way very soon.